Okay, so the theory here is that in the postmodern age, we are focusing entirely on the soft values and therefore rejecting the hard values because these appear to be incompatible and contradictory. So let's start looking at how this is playing out today, how we're getting on with rejecting the hard values. First of all, because we're rejecting truth and knowledge and saying that nothing is real and that feelings matter more than facts, our generation is becoming brainless in a way that is almost unbelievable. And you could say that our generation is even waging a war on truth, or waging a war on the idea that there is such a thing as absolute truth. In December 2015, a 52-year-old Canadian man called Paul Walsh, who was then married and had 7 children, suddenly felt that he was actually a 6-year-old girl called Stephanie. Now, in order to embrace this new identity, he left his wife and his children, started connecting with a transgender community in Toronto, and began living with an adopted mommy and daddy. His days were thereafter spent playing with dolls, colouring in pictures, and sucking on a dummy, or a pacifier if you're in North America. Now, in a previous age where truth mattered, Paul would have been clinically evaluated and some kind of mental breakdown would have probably been diagnosed. Because of course the truth is that Paul is not a 6-year-old girl. However he feels about himself and whatever he wishes his identity to be, the fact remains that he was a 52-year-old man. It may have hurt his feelings to say it, he may have felt offended by that truth, but nevertheless it would have been the truth. Now, in the soft generation, however, we have different priorities. Love is now our ultimate value and it overrides the truth. The postmodernist believes it would be hurtful to tell Paul that he's not a 6-year-old girl, and therefore our civilization now demands that we play along with this delusion out of love and grace and compassion. Love overrides the truth today.
I love being 6 years old.
You want something to drink with that?
Can I have a beer?
Oh, you can't have a beer, you're only 6 years old.
Can I have some candy?
Hey Carl, you got some candy?
I got a lot, Stephanie!
Yay! Carl, you're welcome.
They have candy and schnitzels.
A similar story emerged in 2015 with a CrossFit enthusiast called Tyler DeYoung. Even though he was born in 1983 and was therefore 32 years old, he decided to transition to the birth year 2011, which at the time would have made him 4 years old. Now, of course, the fact is that you can't change the year of your birth. It's an immutable and fixed point in history. And again, in a previous age, in the modern age where truth mattered, we could have told him that. Tyler could have been told as much. However he felt about himself, whatever he wished his identity to be, he was 32. May have hurt his feelings to say it, he may have felt offended by that truth, but nevertheless, it would have been the truth. In the soft generation, however, love overrides the truth. Therefore, the people around him decided to just merely affirm him in this identity as a 4-year-old. He joined a CrossFit kids class, and after dominating it, he made the news. Speaking to the media, he said, "I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for everyone who's been supporting my transition." When his wife was asked for her thoughts, she said, "This is who he is, and celebrating that is more important than pressing him to conform to reality." It's a very key and telling phrase, that reality doesn't matter in this age. It's more important that we just affirm him and love him out of compassion. If he thinks he's a 4-year-old, then we'll treat him as a 4-year-old. In 2016, a 20-year-old Norwegian woman made the headlines for swapping species. She decided that she didn't feel like a human at all, but rather felt like a cat called Nano. She said, "I realized I was a cat when I was 16, when doctors and psychologists found out what was the thing with me. Under my birth, there was a genetic defect." Around the same time, a man called Tom began identifying as a Dalmatian dog called Spot, while a PhD student in Arizona began identifying as a hippopotamus. Now, of course, as if it needs to be said, none of these people really are cats or dogs or hippos, and in a previous age where truth mattered, we could have said that. In the soft age, however, where love trumps truth, our generation believes that all of these people really should be treated as though they were cats and dogs and hippos, that their feelings should override the facts. Some people have decided to identify as transabled as well. A North Carolina woman, despite having perfect eyesight, decided to identify as a blind person. She began wearing opaque glasses so that she couldn't see. She would turn off the lights. She used a white cane. She said, "I really feel this is the way I was supposed to be born, that I should have been blind from birth." Another 61-year-old woman in Utah decided to identify as a paraplegic. Despite having the full use of her legs, she began using a wheelchair and living as though she couldn't walk. Similarly, a man called Nick O'Halloran from Edinburgh, Scotland, made the news in 2017 because he identified as an amputee. He felt that one of his legs didn't really belong to him, and so he chose to live as though he only had one. Again, the plain truth here is that all of these people could see, could walk, they had the full use of all of their limbs. In a previous age, we could have told them that, we could have told them the truth. In the soft age, however, where feelings trump facts, this generation believes that we should merely play along with their fantasies out of love and compassion, so forth and so forth. Some people have even chosen to identify as inanimate objects. For example, a man called Marco believes that he is a cloud trapped in a human body. Marco said, "I always sort of didn't fit my human body, but I didn't realize the extent of it until about a year and a half ago. It's sort of like feeling a longing in a way, longing for a past life where I was a cloud. I have this fan in my room and sometimes I sit in front of it and imagine I'm flying again." The postmodern world has become brainless in a manner that is almost beyond belief, not because these things exist, because of course these things have always existed. There have always been mental breakdowns and psychiatric delusions and insanities. That isn't a unique thing for our generation. The thing that makes postmodernity unique, however, is that for the first time, everyone is expected to play along with the delusions. Instead of calling them out, we're expected to affirm the delusions. If you told modern ears that in the future, people would be running around pretending to be toddlers and animals and clouds, they would have said, "Yeah, right, but they're getting psychiatric help for that, aren't they?" But if you said to them, "No," instead, huge swathes of Western civilization are playing along with the delusions out of a misplaced sense of compassion and reconfiguring society to accommodate them and punishing those who object and who try to speak some truth into the issue, calling them haters and bigots, they would think some kind of madness had descended on their great-great-great-grandchildren. Indeed, you might be someone right now who is looking on at this madness and wondering, what is happening to our society? You might be confused, thinking, why have we lost our minds like this? But hopefully the trench theory explains exactly what has happened. Hopefully you now understand why our civilization turned its back on the truth back in 1967 and came to hate the truth and started pretending that there was no such thing as absolute truth. It all goes back to that love revolution of 1967 when a generation began to fear the truth. They were worried where knowledge was taking us and who just wanted peace and who began seeing truth as an enemy of that peace. The seeds that were planted there are coming to fruition today. We're currently experiencing the outworking of that philosophy that said love is all we need and nothing is real. If love trumps truth and if nothing is real, then of course you can be a dog or a cloud or a hippopotamus. Nothing is real. Now, I guess some people might say to this, but is it really the worst thing in the world to just let these people have their delusions? I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, remember earlier we talked about a man who believed he was a bird and he planned to jump off a bridge so that he could fly south to Africa for the winter. And he encountered a liberal along the way, and because the liberal just wanted to be kind and compassionate and loving, he just affirmed that man in his bird identity. And what happened next? Well, the man jumped off the bridge and he died because the truth was he wasn't a bird, he was a man. Well, that's a picture, that's a parable, if you like, of the problem here. Love detached from truth becomes unloving. We're becoming unloving to these people with their psychiatric problems when we affirm them in their delusions rather than help them come back to reality, rather than speaking truth to them. Remember the North Carolina woman with perfect eyesight who identified as blind? Well, because nobody helped her and spoke the truth to her, she ended up pouring drain cleaner into her eyes, and now she genuinely is blind. In fact, out of a misplaced sense of compassion, a psychologist did it for her. In order to affirm her feelings, to affirm her delusions, she deliberately blinded the woman. The woman who wants to be paraplegic, she found a surgeon willing to affirm her delusion as well and make her paralyzed for real if she could raise $25,000.
I did find a surgeon in another country who would be prepared to do femoral and sciatic nerve transections to paralyze my legs. It would be at least $25,000. I don't have the money to do it.
Likewise, there are many people who suffer from gender dysphoria. They feel like they should be a different sex from the one that they really are. Now, rather than speaking truth to them, helping them to accept reality and exploring the psychological reasons why they've rejected a part of their true identity. It's now commonplace for doctors, again out of a misplaced sense of compassion, to merely affirm their feelings and to perform irreversible surgeries. Some of these people are filled with remorse afterwards, but by then it's far, far too late. A woman from Newcastle, England called Charlie Evans, who detransitioned back to her original sex after living for 10 years as a man, spoke out about this in 2019. She said that in response to her story, hundreds of people had contacted her alone to say that they were also experiencing regret. They wished that someone had challenged them rather than merely facilitating their feelings. And many of them are now suing the NHS because they feel like they weren't given proper care. Nobody told them the truth. Nobody helped them to come back to reality.
After going public with her detransition story, she discovered an online community of 5,000 in a similar position. 30 people alone in her area of Newcastle.
I was approached by a young woman with a beard, and she hugged me and said, I'm a detransitioned woman as well, I've just stopped taking testosterone. And after that I felt like I had to do something. I'm hearing from hundreds of people.
The whole process is really, really traumatic, really, when I'm looking back on it. And there's no going back from it, really, because you know, you are changed forever visibly. I think I was about 4 or 5 here. That was like only a year or so into transition. There was no real investigation into the other mental health issues that I was going through, or any other factors that could possibly be contributing to the feelings that I had at the time. I think depression kind of kicked in a bit more because I was without any hormones in my body, and you know, especially at such a young age when it's supposed to be, you know, at its peak almost. That's yeah, very detrimental, I think.
When we refuse to acknowledge these issues as psychiatric problems which are centered here and which need to be resolved here, and instead out of a misplaced, overpowered and imbalanced sense of compassion, we merely just affirm and facilitate delusions, that compassion becomes uncompassionate. There are real consequences for people's lives when we refuse to give them some hard truth. Whether it be affirming a man as a bird so he jumps off a bridge, helping a person who can see blind herself, helping a woman who can walk to paralyze herself, or just helping people with gender dysphoria damage their bodies and lives. There are repercussions when we pretend that there is no such thing as absolute truth. The really loving thing, the really compassionate thing, would be to tell these people about reality, help their minds align with that reality, rather than saying nothing is real and affirming their delusions and feelings. There are repercussions not just for individuals themselves, but also for wider society when we do this. In recent years, there have been a number of cases where male criminals, including sex offenders, have started feeling like they might be women and so being transferred to female-only prisons. While there, they have quite predictably sexually assaulted the female inmates. Now, those female inmates could have been spared that trauma if someone simply spoke some hard truth into that situation, saying, look, you're not women, you're men, you're staying in the male prison. Doesn't matter what you feel about that, doesn't matter if you're offended, you're a man, you're staying in the male prison. That's all it would have taken to speak some plain truth to spare those female inmates that trauma. There are repercussions in sport as well. Male-born athletes who self-identify as women now tend to be allowed participation in female sporting events. Since the biology of men gives them on average a 12% performance advantage in swimming and running, a 20% advantage in jumping events, and a 35% advantage in strength-based sports, many women are simply unable to compete now on level terms. It makes life unfair for those women athletes. And that unfairness, again, it could be easily rectified if we just spoke some plain biological truth. You're not women, you're men, you're not competing against women. If you want to compete, compete against the men. That's all it would have taken. Compassion ceases to be compassion without some truth. In fact, these physical advantages that men have go beyond unfairness and become dangerous in some sports, particularly combat sports. There have now been male-born fighters competing in mixed martial arts cage events against women, such as Alana McLaughlin, who spent 33 years as a man and who had previously been a soldier in the United States Special Forces, and also Fallon Fox, who brutally defeated a female opponent so badly that the referee was forced to stop the fight after just 2 minutes. In that short time, the opponent, Tamika Brents, had suffered a concussion and a broken skull that required 7 staples. Brent said later, "I've fought a lot of women and I've never felt the strength that I felt in a fight as I did that night. I can't answer whether it's because she was born a man or not because I'm not a doctor. I can only say I've never felt so overpowered ever in my life, and I am an abnormally strong female in my own right. Her grip was different. I could usually move around in the clinch against other females, but couldn't move at all in Fox's clinch. Ignoring facts has consequences." And again, all it would have taken in this situation is for somebody to speak some plain biological truth into the matter. You're not a woman, you're a man. If you want to fight, you fight against the men. That's all it would have taken to spare Brent a broken skull. I saw it said recently that you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. That's a really concise way to put it. Put biological men into competition with women, into cage fights, and into female prisons, and reality is going to happen. There will be consequences, whether you want them to be or not. Nothing is real. The consequences are going to be all too real for those involved. Love, detached from truth, becomes unloving. And the thing is, what I have to keep repeating about our generation is that we are choosing this. We are choosing to become brainless. We are choosing to hate the truth. We are choosing to pretend that nothing is real. We all know the truth about these things, really. Even hardcore liberals know what the truth is about these things. It's just this misplaced, overpowered, and imbalanced sense of compassion is causing some people to deliberately deny what they know is true and pretend things that they know aren't real. And in that process, our generation is simply becoming foolish.